Welcome everyone to our National Adaptation Strategy webcast. You're here just a little bit early, so we're going to play a video for you from the actual engagement platform. And so enjoy. Great, thank you, Mary. So I see some people introducing themselves in chat, and you can feel free to continue to do that. I'm going to welcome you officially to the event tonight. I am a volunteer. My name is Colleen. Pronouns are she, her, and I'm a volunteer with ClimateFast and Toronto350. And we're co-hosting the event tonight, along with the input of Climate Legacy, who joined us, and Nature Canada, Nature Ontario. And I would actually just like to introduce our MC so that you can take it away for us. So I'm introducing Tiffany Regaudie, who will guide us through the night and make sure we follow the flow. Tiffany is an independent writer who's been using the power of word choice as a form of activism for more than 10 years. And as communications manager for the MS Society of Canada, she advocated for people with disabilities for more than 5 years before she moved on to the tech industry, where she helped establish Venture Out, the first LGBTQ+ tech conference in Canada. And she now volunteers with us at Toronto350 to help stop the climate crisis. So thank you, Tiffany, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Colleen. Before we begin today, we'd like to acknowledge the sacred land on which we live and meet today. This land has been a site of human activity for 15,000 years. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit. The territory is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are so grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this territory. And if you want to take action right now, we'll be posting a link to a petition. The petition serves to mobilize the vast resources of the federal government to immediately secure and decontaminate the GNR recycling facility in the Kanesatake region in Quebec. And also more broadly, it puts forward concrete plans to enact the measures addressing systemic environmental racism as proposed in a former bill C-230. So that link is in the chat. You can have a little look through now or after the event if you'd like to take some action right now. Also, before we begin, just some reminders to stay on mute for the duration of the event, but you can use chat for questions that you'd like answered in the Q&A portion, which will come closer to the end of the session. If you're experiencing any tech issues, reach out to our tech rep, Mark Shapland, if you need help. Also, just a reminder that this session will be recorded and shared later in various formats, so you'll be able to access it later. Closed captions are also available. If you hover over closed captions or more, then show subtitle, you should be able to access those. And also feel free to express yourself throughout the event. Use the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. We really love that feedback. Just a quick run through the agenda tonight so you know what's coming up. Our friends at Nature Canada are going to run through what is Canada's National Adaptation Strategy, why it's important, what's happened so far, and give you a bit of an overview as to what the recommendations are. Our friends at Climate Legacy will talk a bit about how to navigate the process and participate. Then Toronto350, we've put together a toolkit for you, which we'll share after the event. So you'll have some guidance to kind of take away for yourself. Then after that, we'll have a moderated Q&A. So make sure to get in your questions while people are presenting and speaking, and your questions will be addressed then. And then we'll put you into breakouts so that you can discuss what you've just learned and talk about how you want to help with the submissions. And then we'll come back and do a little bit of group sharing before we close off for the evening. So I'll just start by introducing Nature Canada. So Nature Canada is one of the oldest national nature conservation charities in Canada. For 80 years, Nature Canada has helped protect over 110 million acres of parks and wildlife areas in Canada and countless species. From Nature Canada, we have here Teagan Yaremchuk, who's a network organizer with Nature Canada. She was born and raised in a small town outside of Ottawa on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. She grew up learning to respect and love surrounding natural areas, and this led her to pursue a degree in environmental studies at Carleton University. Since graduation, she's been working in the environmental nonprofit sector, focused on creating change from the ground up. Also joining her today is Michael Polyani, who's the Policy and Campaign Manager for Nature Canada. He's been a social and environmental policy researcher at Queen's Park, National Anti-Poverty Program Coordinator at Kairos, and a community engagement worker with the Children's Aid Society of Toronto. He has led and supported numerous peace, justice, and environmental campaigns, including securing the City of Toronto's climate emergency declaration in 2019. So with that, I will turn it over to Teagan and Michael.
Hello. Michael, would you like to start sharing your screen? Awesome. All right, so I wanted to start off today by acknowledging the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people that I'm calling in from today. Indigenous reconciliation is very relevant to the discussion that we're about to have on climate change and adaptation, including, the importance of acknowledging and respecting Indigenous ways of knowing, capacities, and resilience, which non-Indigenous people have much to learn from. So to start with, I am going to share very quickly about Nature Canada, although Tiffany, you did a great overview, so I'll just add a bit more detail to that. And then I'll pass it off to Michael in a moment to talk more about the National Adaptation Strategy. So we're going to talk, again, here's just the summary of what we're going to speak on, and our hopes for today are to increase awareness of the National Adaptation Strategy public consultation process, to lay out Nature Canada's ideas about the priorities for this strategy with a nature perspective, to inspire you to raise your voice and including that of your communities and be part of this public consultation process, and to help inform a national adaptation strategy that is equitable, sustainable, advances reconciliation, and advances the survival of all species, not just humans. So very quickly about Nature Canada. So some of you may know who we are already. And as Tiffany said, we are one of the oldest national nature conservation charities in Canada. Our mission is to help Canadians discover, defend, and restore nature. And we have six programs through which we do this. So we also work from what we call a top-down and a bottom-up approach. So our top-down is when we're lobbying federal government officials on important nature priorities and policies, or when we participate in government consultations, like for this National Adaptation Strategy. And our bottom-up work is when we kind of work at the more grassroots level. We lend support and give opportunities to organizations across the country to get them involved in our programs and to help them raise their voice for nature. So this is capacity building, offering kind of easy, shovel-ready ways that people can get involved. And yeah, these are primarily when we work with organizations, and we call these organizations our nature network. And the National Adaptation Strategy is a time when these two ways that we work together, or that we work, come together. Yeah, so we have quite a big reach, as you can see there. And yeah, I won't take up too much more time. I'll pass it off to Michael Polyani, who's the Policy and Campaign Manager for our Nature-Based Climate Solutions campaign, to talk about all things National Adaptation Strategy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael, and really glad to be here, and glad that you're here. And I'm actually in Toronto, what's known as Toronto, and that's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and Mississauga of the First Nation, Credit First Nation. And as Teagan mentioned, I want to quite briefly, I think, do three things. One is let you know or share why I feel that this is a really important opportunity for engagement right now with the development of the National Adaptation Strategy, to share just a little bit about what's gone on in the past year in terms of the development of the strategy to date. And then I want to share what Nature Canada feels are the critical elements that we want to see in the strategy for it to be a success in terms of building the resiliency of communities and building the resilience of all species and ecosystems with which we share the planet. So I think this is a really important opportunity because two reasons, really. I mean, one is just that this strategy will be a framework that sets the direction for policy and funding priorities for the federal government, but also for other levels of government, I think for quite a number of years. So it's really important to get it right. The other piece is just that for those of you who might have been kind of following this or looking at some of the documents that have come out so far, I think there's kind of two directions that this could go in. And one is, if you read the discussion paper, which I'll talk a bit more about in a minute, is kind of a focus on protecting, sort of more of a reactive focus, protecting human communities from extreme weather related to climate change, getting sort of emergency response mechanisms in place, building up kind of gray infrastructure or protective infrastructure like seawalls and that sort of thing. So there's kind of this sort of urgent emergency side to things. And that's really important. But there's also another element that is also discussed, and I think is equally, if not more important. And that's the need for a strategy that really transforms the way that our country, our communities interact with nature, and also the way that humans interact with each other. So really calling for something that's quite transformative from a societal basis, from an economic basis, and from a nature basis. So I want you just to maybe keep those two directions in mind, because I think that this is really an opportunity for a transformational approach to adaptation. So I won't spend much time on this. I mean, you're here, you're concerned about the climate crisis. You, like everyone else in Canada and around the world, is reading about or experiencing the direct impacts of climate change. And the point I want to make here is that it's affecting all of Canada in different ways, and it's affecting human communities, but it's also affecting natural ecosystems and species. I think there was a recent study that stated that 1/3 of all species are threatened with extinction in the next 50 years as a result of climate change. So this is, of course, serious for human communities and also for ecosystems and other species that we live with. So the National Adaptation Strategy was announced at the end of 2020 in the climate plan at the time. These are the components that it were indicated that it would include: vision, priorities and objectives, a blueprint for action. The process has been going on for about a year now, and there was sort of a discussion process with stakeholders in the fall. There were in the summer last year, there were expert advisory tables that were formed in the fall that fed into a discussion paper, which was released last month. And really over the next 4 weeks is an opportunity for the public to engage, share its priorities, your priorities, and then the strategy will be finalized and released in the fall. The discussion paper, which I mentioned, it's available online on the letstalkadaptation.ca website. These are the components that it includes. I'll touch on a couple of these. So the vision that it proposes is as written. It's really that all of us are resilient to climate change, and that adaptation works to enhance well-being and secure a thriving environment and economy. And I think some of us who've been watching the process are not thrilled with the all of us language, because we really feel that this strategy should be about resilience, as I've said, of human communities, but also ecosystems and all species. And then the second point, it does mention that a thriving environment is critical, which is good. And it really raises the question is, what kind of economy are we wanting to build that is conducive to a thriving environment? Because we know right now, with our current approach to economic development, that we're seeing nature loss, overexploitation of nature, and massive amounts of greenhouse gas emissions that are driving climate change. So obviously we need to change. The principles for the strategy are outlined in that discussion paper as well. And I just bring your attention to what I feel are perhaps the most critical ones: respecting Indigenous rights, advancing equity, of course, because we know that climate change disproportionately affects racialized, low-income, and Indigenous communities, and informed by science and Indigenous knowledge, which I think is really important. The discussion paper talks about 5 key areas or systems. It outlines goals, objectives, and for each of these 5 systems, there were 5 expert advisory tables to inform those recommendations, those initial sort of recommendations in the discussion paper. As you can see them, but I would just say here that I think that you'll probably agree that a healthy planet, a healthy natural environment is a basis for human health and well-being, a basis for infrastructure that protects us, a basis for a thriving economy, and also is critical to protecting us from disasters. The discussion paper also mentions some short-term illustrative actions. So just a few, and I would highlight here, I underline prioritizing nature-based solutions, because that's really something that Nature Canada and I think a number of other organizations feel is critical to advance the protection, restoration, and better management of nature, to both protect human communities, but also stem biodiversity loss and ensure sustainability of all species. So Nature Canada has been very engaged over the past year. We participated in an initial stakeholder dialogue that the government hosted. We hosted a number of regional discussions with our partners across Canada. We participated on the Natural Environment Advisory Table for the strategy. We sent the Prime Minister a letter calling for nature to be at the center of the framework, the discussion paper. And so we're somewhat pleased that it is there in the discussion paper, the importance of protecting and restoring nature. And right now we're mobilizing partners from across the country to participate in consultations. And we've just launched the joint sign-on letter that we're getting organizations to sign, and Teagan will talk a bit more about that. So we feel that protecting and restoring nature should be at the center of the adaptation strategy. We believe that for a number of reasons. Natural ecosystems store massive amounts of carbon, so they're critical to mitigating emissions, which are driving extreme weather events. They're critical to stemming the species extinction crisis and biodiversity loss that's going on, that's also threatening our survival. They're cost-effective. Protecting nature is a cost-effective way to protect communities through building natural infrastructure, and protecting nature also enhances human health and well-being. And when nature protection is led by Indigenous communities and Indigenous people, it can advance reconciliation and can advance equity in our country. So I'll just briefly mention the three key elements that we're really pushing for in the strategy, which form part of our sign-on letter. And the first is that we want to see nature protection clearly embedded in the goals and the objectives for the strategy. And so we're looking for full recovery of nature by 2050, but more importantly, short-term objectives, halting and reversing biodiversity loss, advancing Indigenous-led conservation and stewardship, mainstreaming nature-based climate solutions, putting in place conservation and restoration plans for ecosystems that are threatened, and building up a database of that tells us how we're doing in terms of the state of ecosystems and habitats and in protecting them. And all of these goals and objectives are part of the discussion paper. So we're really saying, include these, make them central to all elements and all kind of areas of the final strategy. We're also calling for specific short-term actions to advance nature protection in the next 3 to 5 years. And some of these very much align with the goals and objectives that I just talked about. Expanding Indigenous-led conservation and restoration, expanding funding and support for nature-based solutions and natural infrastructure. And when I'm talking about natural infrastructure, I'm talking about wetlands, coastal grasslands, inland grasslands, any kind of natural ecosystem that provides benefits in terms of protecting human communities from heat, extreme heat, and flooding and drought. And better protecting wetlands, forests, grasslands, and coastal areas goes with nature-based solutions. And then also an important action to ensure that we have baseline data on the state of our ecosystems so we can monitor progress in terms of protecting them. And then the last area is really just getting back to what I started off with, which was this choice between a kind of narrow, protective, reactive strategy or a transformative strategy. And we really want to see a strategy that transforms communities to make them more equitable and resilient, and transforms our relationship with nature to bring our economy and our society back into balance with the nature upon which we're so intertwined. So We're calling for a shift in lens from development to stewardship. That's language used in the discussion paper. We want the adaptation strategy to expect it to consider all species and the resilience of all species. We want to see it strongly aligned with Canada's commitment to end nature loss and to stop the degradation of habitats and ecosystems. We want to see a strong expansion of Indigenous leadership in conservation and protection. And we want to see a systemic approach in terms of transforming our social and economic and cultural framing of how we think about our human communities and our relationship to nature. I think that's it for me, and I think Teagan is going to share a couple of, oh, no, I was just going to say one more thing, is just that other groups, of course, are weighing in on the adaptation strategy, and the Green Budget Coalition is pushing for concrete investments in the 2023 budget to advance adaptation. And many of you may know CANRAC, Climate Action Network, and it's engaging as well, especially on the equity side, ensuring that the strategy addresses the needs of vulnerable groups and communities, and that it advances financing of adaptation at the international level for developing countries that are deeply threatened by climate change. So, sorry, over to you, Teagan.
All right, I will just take one moment to kind of give an overview of how you can actually provide your input on this strategy. As Michael has clearly stated, the opportunity is to influence the strategy is extremely important. We really only kind of have one shot at this, as these strategies are not created often, and this will help shape what climate change adaptation looks like for this country far into the future, and not just for humans, but for all species. So the first thing is, if you're part of an organization, you can sign on to our open letter. I believe the link was just in the chat there. So that is just for organizations, not for individuals. So if you are part of an organization, please take that back. And yeah, we'd love to add your name. And then I won't go over the next 2 points here in detail, because I think that other folks on this call are about to do that. But there is a government portal and a government email address where you can provide your ideas and your feedback by July 15th. So for the next couple of weeks. And yeah, we'll make sure to send around all the links to all of you so that you get those. And yeah, happy to answer questions in the Q&A period after, or feel free to reach out to either of us. Our emails are up there on the screen. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Teagan and Michael. Great reminders, you know, that if we protect nature, and we really need this like attitude shift from one of extraction to stewardship. So great reminder that, you know, if we protect nature, we also protect humans because we are so linked. So thank you so much for that important reminder. Next, I'd like to introduce Emma Bider from Climate Legacy, which is a project to engage and mobilize older Canadians in climate action through their voice, their time, and their money. The 65+ demographic is a significant force in combating climate change and is often overlooked in mobilizing efforts. Emma Bider is here with Climate Legacy. She is Climate Legacy's communications coordinator, a PhD student, and a writer living in Ottawa. She's a passionate environmental activist and a great believer in the power of storytelling to make change. So with that, I will pass it over to Emma.
Thanks very much, Tiffany. And thank you so much to ClimateFast and Toronto350 for inviting us to this workshop and for the work you're doing. It was a sort of a spontaneous collaboration, but I'm super happy that it worked out. And I would like to also acknowledge that I am on the unceded traditional territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. So at Climate Legacy, we spend a lot of time outlining, sharing, and supporting what older adults can and are doing as key contributors to the fight against climate change through our network and through a number of communications initiatives. As Tiffany mentioned, this demographic is a huge asset to the climate movement. And, you know, if we want to go into more details, we can chat about that in the Q&A. But in addition to this support work and sort of ways of outlining these great attributes, we also think about what barriers this demographic face when they want to get involved but aren't sure where to start. And I should say that some of these barriers we're talking about are not necessarily unique to older adults, but they certainly are some that affect them. And in the case of the National Adaptation Strategy, I think we can all agree that we have a clear case of a somewhat poorly designed process that leaves people out if they aren't digital natives. The registration process is kind of confusing. Where to add your ideas is not necessarily intuitive, and the topic descriptions can be long and sort of jargony. So I think that the work that ClimateFast and Toronto350 and the presentation that Michael and Teagan just gives you a great sense, sort of actually simplifies and shows what is happening and what's important. And for our part, we made a short video that explains step-by-step how to create an account on the Let's Talk Adaptation website so that you can fill out the consultation. And we hope that this complements the great work that these other folks are doing and have done, so that it's as easy as possible for everyone to share their ideas and stories with the federal government on these issues. And in addition to the video, over the next couple of weeks, we'll be creating infographics that outline as simply as possible each of the 5 overarching topics, what they encompass and how you can add your voice. And we'll be sharing that on our Facebook and Twitter pages and sharing with the 2 other, with ClimateFast and Toronto350 to share as well. So without further ado, Mary, if you could please play the video, and I look forward to everyone's feedback.
Thank you so much, Emma. Very helpful for people who want to get started. But next, I'll introduce Susan Bakshi. Susan is a volunteer with both ClimateFast and Toronto350, and she's going to take you through the toolkit that we've created, just so that you're walking away from this event with something that you can use to really help you contribute feedback to the strategy. So take it away, Susan.
Okay. Thank you, Tiffany. So tonight, I'm very excited to introduce to you a crowdsourced tool that ClimateFast and Toronto350 have put together to help people engage with the Let's Talk Adaptation portal. The goal of this document is to create a supportive space for engagement, and we are hopeful that the toolkit inspires participation through a collective sharing between communities. It is not our intention to speak for anyone or act as a voice of authority. This process now is about hearing and listening to climate stories from communities across Canada. You are the experts. It's your lived experiences and observations, and it's your across Canada that we want to hear, and will help prioritize the NAS plan. That is what is critical during this process. And so we're hoping that many of you will add to the document over the next month as you interact with the Let's Talk Adaptation portal. So let me start at the beginning, where we briefly go through what the National Adaptation portal is about. We've got some critical dates. So I noticed in the chat, someone was asking when the due date is, and the last day is July 15th for submission. We've got some links to the discussion paper and, of course, a direct link to the engagement platform itself. So there are two sections in which you can submit your comments on the platform. So one is the ideas section, which we saw briefly in the video, and the other one is the forum. So in the ideas section, if you're sharing an idea or comment that fits nicely within one of the 5 themes of objective pages, you would post your idea or comment in that section. However, there may be time when you find that some of your comments or stories don't quite fit into one of the objectives. So you can comment or add to the portal by engaging in the forum space that you can access here. So that we have it links twice actually. So the other alternative engagement is to send a email submission. So if you have a longer submission, it might be more appropriate to write out an email, or you might just prefer engaging in that way. You don't want to deal with the web portal. On the government website, when we first started engaging with it, we were a bit confused because it did seem like only organizations were being asked to submit emails, but we have found out that individuals are allowed to submit email comments. And so we have the link to the email address right here. So how to use this crowdsource kit. It's a long document, but it's actually quite easy to use. This button here is will open up a table of contents. And you'll see that we've got each of the 5 themes and their objectives set out. So you can jump around the documents just by clicking on the heading and then the different objectives, and you can just kind of go around. If you keep this table of contents open all the time, you can kind of make sure that you know where you are. You won't get too lost. So at the top of the theme, you'll see the guiding questions that are being lined out by the government that you can keep in mind. We've got each of the objectives colorized here, so they kind of stand out a bit more. If you click on the objective, I'm not going to do it now, but if you click on it, it will take you directly to the ideas page on the portal, and so you can click and toggle between this document and the website quite easily. And then under the objective, we've got some sample points and sample answers. If you wanted to add, and we really hope you do add comments or suggestions, because everyone's community is going to have a different priority that they'd like listed, it's very easy. You just click in the section that you want to add, type in, please plant more trees or whatever you want to add, it will come up as a suggested comment. We will be keeping an eye on it, and we will add it to the appropriate section that, like, throughout the process. So you have commenting privileges, but we retain editing privileges just to make sure everyone's playing nice. So that's it for the basic navigation and what we have on offer. Now I'm going to ask Colleen, my colleague at Toronto350 and ClimateFast, to walk us through one of the specific themes for you in detail.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Susan. So I just wanted to walk you through one of the themes once again. Susan actually explained how it worked pretty well, but we're hoping this is a source of inspiration because it's really important. Your comments, your observations and experiences and ideas all across the country, everyone, it's really important that you put your own ideas in. So Susan did show you how to do that. You could also make a comment. If you highlighted one of the words and press the comment button that shows up, you can also actually add to the doc that way. But let's just walk through this one section here. So this is health and well-being. And you see at the top, we've got a short description about what the government is asking for. And they're asking generally for ideas to inform short-term actions to support their proposed objectives in each of the sections. And so we put in the top here guiding questions. These guiding questions are for every objective in the section. And in this case, it's, has your health been impacted by climate-related events? And what are the top climate-related health impacts that should be prioritized for action? So really, it's accessible because it's asking you for your opinion and your observations and your experience. So if you just scroll down a little bit, you'll see objective 1 under health, like Susan showed you, we took out the objective and we put it there. You'll notice that this was a broken link on their website, and I'm going to tell them about that. But if you find any broken links or anything that we should report, that might be a good thing to do as well. So as Susan mentioned, we have sample points, and these are just to inspire you. Toronto350 members have come up with them. And in this case, we're talking about how there needs to be coordination and collaboration between all parties involved. And if you just scroll down a little bit more, after the sample points, we have an example. These are Toronto350 members' personal comments to give you an example of what your answers might look like, just to inspire you again, also to get us thinking. So for example, I live in a rural location. And this is my comment. So I did live in a rural location, my family does, and there's less local access to health services. So the care there needs to be better resourced, and knowledge sharing from larger centers could help. And then I listed some of the health related problems that I see growing in my own area. So I hope that these just are jumping off points and that you are willing to share in this doc, but more importantly, willing to go to the engagement platform itself and give your perspectives. And if there are any questions that you have, we have an email at the top of this doc that you can email if you've got any questions. And also just one other thing, we have some references in the document. And when you scroll down, you see there are sections called select references. And those are also places you can go to get more information about what you might want to say and do some more research. And you can add to these lists too if you've got something that we should see that we haven't got in there. So I hope that makes it a little more accessible for you to see what we've tried to do here. And with that, I think I'll just bounce it or just reiterate the fact this is crowdsourced. So yes, there'll be some sections that don't have much in them at all. And we would really love you to help us fill them out if you have the time and the inclination. Okay, with that, I think I'll hand it back to Tiffany.
Thank you so much, Colleen. Now is the time for Q&A. So if you have any questions about what you just heard from any of the speakers, now's your chance to submit any questions that you have. There were probably some questions submitted before, but like keep submitting them. Feel free as we run through the Q&A. And I'll pass it back over to Colleen to read out your questions.
Yeah, okay. So I had the first question in the chat, we're going to go in order, was the picture that Teagan and Michael showed in their slide set had a picture of some grasses. And the question was, can anyone confirm that these tall grasses are not phragmites? Question for Teagan and Michael.
I'm not sure which slide it was, so I'm not an expert on that, frankly. Maybe Teagan knows, but we can check into it, that we're not promoting an invasive species. We don't want to do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, we will be sharing a link to your slides. So maybe if you have an answer at that time, we can put that in as well.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Awesome. So I also had a comment that I did want to bring forward to see if anybody had an answer, and if not, I think we should find one. It was about visually impaired resources and accessibility, and I'm wondering if the whole website addresses that. So I would like to look into that, or if somebody has an answer now, if there's any accessibility considerations on the actual website, which is confusing enough. As we know, it's very confusing. So I don't know if anybody has that answer. If not, I'd like to follow up with that as well.
I know that on the website there is an accessibility statement, and it talks about that how the website's built, and it talks a bit about accessibility. I could put that link in the chat.
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you, Michael. The deadline as well, we answered that it's July 15th, but there's always some question around that, whether that means midnight on July 15th, end of day, or the next morning. I wonder if anybody knows, or whether we should just all be safe and submit by the end of the day on the 15th.
I know.
Okay,
I haven't seen a time designated, so I'm assuming you have until 11:59.
Yeah, 11:59. Okay, that's when I submit usually. That's usually when I submit. Okay, so there's two more. The second last one is, I'm assuming the portal allows users to save their work and return to it later. That is a very good question. Does anybody know the answer to that?
My understanding is yes, but I'm not 100% sure, but I think when they were describing it to us, they said that that's possible.
Great. I think you're registering, so it would make sense that you have a record there of what you're working on. But okay, and there's one more. And how much can the federal government save us from the worst policies and actions of the provincial governments, as in Ontario and Alberta? Anyone want to hazard an answer to that?
It's a complicated question. I mean, I think it depends what's in federal jurisdiction. I think there are, one example is Highway 413, right? Just how the federal government has indicated that they are designating that for a federal assessment. It doesn't mean that it won't go ahead, but the federal government does have intervention and jurisdiction over what are deemed nationally significant projects that cross over boundaries, or that go into federal areas of jurisdiction. So it's a big question, but I think there are things that the federal government can do. Obviously, there are limitations to that constitutionally. Others might have more to say on that.
Yes. So actually, there are three more questions now. I missed one by Melissa, and let's see. I think we'll answer these three, and then we may have to move on, but these are really good questions. So Melissa's question is, while I agree that all of this is important, how do you reconcile with the IPCC report stating that emissions have to peak within 2 to 3 years before we have catastrophic consequences? Now, I would say one thing, Melissa, that all the way through the sample idea doc, I think we've all been reinforcing the need both to reduce the need for adaptation to begin with, right? By mitigating. Does anybody else want to give an answer to that question, or their thoughts on that question?
I can take a stab at it. Yeah, I would just say that I think they need to happen at the same time. If only because if we were to say achieve our IPCC goals by 2030, we would still be dealing with these kinds of catastrophic events. And it's unclear how or when they will affect us. So I think it's critical that we think about adaptation as something that is at present an issue, while acknowledging that we still need to think about the future of, we don't want things to get worse. But where I am currently, we just had well, probably anyone who's in Ontario noticed, we have a horrible storm, the May long weekend. That's exactly the kind of thing that we need to be adapting to, and it needs to happen as soon as possible, along the same timeline as our sort of IPCC bolder goals about how we stop this from getting worse.
Thank you, Emma. That was a very good answer. So 2 more questions. So what is the reach of the National Adaptation Strategy in comparison to provincial adaptation strategies and civic adaptation strategies? Anybody would like to try to answer that one?
I mean, I would just say one of the guiding principles is that this federal strategy is supposed to build on existing provincial and municipal strategies. So it's not a replacement for, and you know, I know that the federal government has been in discussions with provincial and territorial partners around the development of the strategy. So I think the hope is that there will be strong buy-in from provincial level, and I don't know, maybe that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I know some of my own personal sample answers in the doc were like, please work to get Ontario on board. You know what I mean? So you can even say things like that. I would think you're free to. Okay, so Bob Garson has 2 questions in the chat. And how do we reconcile this process with the actual records of our governments? And in addition, with the daily reports that governments are supporting actions that are moving the world and Canada in the opposite direction? That's a big question too, Bob. So I would say that we need to keep pushing. Does anybody else have a more nuanced answer than that? Emma, I see you smiling. Did you want to take a stab at a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to get discouraged when you see this sort of apparent hypocrisy. But I think it speaks to Michael's earlier point that currently we have a political system at all 3 levels of government that is still thinking about the economy and development as the primary objectives that they need to sort of succeed at. We need to think about this transformational change of how we approach and how we live with nature. So to me, the challenge, in addition to sort of always pushing these governments, always like sort of contributing to these kinds of processes, is to also be changing the narrative of how we talk about our relationships to nature. And I think that's the part that, yes, it's slow, no doubt. But I think that's the part that's really going to see a shift in between this, like, you know, that changes the rhetoric to action in a lot of cases, because it offers the solutions, right? How do you build a highway when you want to save nature? Well, that can't be the question anymore. We can't. So yeah.
Thank you. So I can answer Bob's second question, I think. Can we share the information and comments with our municipal governments? I do not see why not. You are free to share whatever comments and ideas you want at any level, and they all need to work together. So I would say a definite yes. Okay, so I think that's it for the Q&A. Thank you so much. I'll pass it back over to Tiffany to introduce our next section.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for your questions. Questions around this topic tend to be very difficult, and we definitely acknowledge that. And actually, that's probably why this next part is so important. Pretty soon we're going to, like magic, just push you into breakout rooms with our facilitators. We recognize that it's sometimes easier to discuss these things in smaller groups, and we really want your feedback and opinions on possibly participating in this process. So with that, you will be put into a breakout room where the facilitators can begin a discussion. Back, everyone. I hope everyone had really good discussions. I know that we did in our group. So now just that we're making sure that we're learning from each other and knowing what each group discussed, each of the facilitators will kind of go through and give a bit of a summary because we might learn from each other.
Do you want it? What group do you want to start with? You have, can't remember if we had numbers or.
Lynn, feel free to
Sure.
go ahead.
Okay. Well, we talked a bit about how can we increase the reach of who knows about this consultation, who has the opportunity to have input into the conversation. So how do we get to not the usual suspects, so to speak, and a wider reach? And also we talked about to have greater participation, we really need to have a simple version, like an action letter version, that people can add maybe a sentence or two to it about why it matters to them, but basically it's written for them. And they can, just to show that the public is interested and concerned, even if the concern was that people wouldn't want to spend hours. Not that many people are going to be able to spend hours writing something. Groups might, but groups also have the option of signing the common letter. So that's a sort of an easy thing for groups to do. But individuals may want to use that toolbox, or they may find that takes them too long. And then they get deterred and don't do it. So that would, anybody else in our group want to add to that? That's kind of two main points I took out of our group. We also thought approaching the OFL, going through the OCEC to reach many groups, but we need other strategies to reach more people.
Can I go next? Because I think it dovetails a little bit with that. Because in our group, we actually thought about how important it was that we had multiple individual submissions, even if they were simple, and even if they reflected very local concerns. We talked about so many different things that everybody would want to cover. So one thing we talked about was global equity, and bringing in global equity concerns, and even thinking about what fair share is and a just transition of what fair share would mean. Fair share within Canada doesn't necessarily mean global fair share, right? So like to us, the concept in Canada can be inequitable in other countries. So it was a very interesting discussion along that. We had an interesting discussion about our concern around Ontario and on Ontario and the action, or not the lack of action that might happen in Ontario. And we discussed how knocking on MPPs' doors in all different ridings might be important. And also just bringing that point up again and again in our comments, that we are concerned, we need to somehow make sure that these provinces that are a little bit of laggards are behind. And we talked about metrics to help with that, and metrics tied to funding. And we talked a lot about building codes, and the building codes as well were very regional. Like if you're having wildfires, then there's different things that the building code needs to address and is slow in addressing now. So it was very a multitude of ideas in our group, and yeah, so it was really exciting conversation. And we caught it off the very last point that Gail was making, which was about real, I believe it was about real and not sort of token language sounding good around Indigenous rights and Indigenous involvement in inclusion. And that was a big thing we talked about as well. So yeah, thank you, my group. I thought that was a wonderful discussion.
I can go next. I don't know how you guys got all that in there, Colleen. So my group had a very different conversation. We opened up the toolkit and then went into the portal, and we walked through the portal and kind of walked through how to do a submission, and kind of discovering that it doesn't have to be that daunting, because it's only, if you're in the ideas forum, it's only ideas page is only 140 characters. So it is short answers. We had a really fabulous discussion on mental health and the climate crisis, which is part of one of the themes. And I will be adding a couple of resources to that section on a recent study. And two recent studies, one that's Canadian and one is a global study on the climate crisis and mindset. And the other thing that we kept coming back to was mitigation and adaptation, and how kind of infuriating it is that we're where we are right now, and how mitigation adaptation has to be hand in hand. So if we are submitting longer comments or emails or in the forum. It would be fabulous if the government got that message that we need to keep, mitigation measures funded and focused. As I think Catherine Hayhoe is now getting famous for saying, we can't adapt our way out of this crisis. So I think that's how we ended our talk. Oh, but we also did talk, sorry, it started with the accessibility. We need to get some answers around that. I haven't heard anything, so we need to get some answers on that. So yeah, my group is fabulous, so thank you very much.
And can I just clarify, but I'm pretty sure that what Judith was saying about the video, not being able to get anything from the video, being visually impaired, is that it's music. There's no voiceover explaining what the steps are. But also it looked blurry tonight, which in our rehearsal, it didn't look blurry to me. So I'm not sure why the video was blurry tonight. I'm not exactly sure why. But the idea of a voiceover, I don't know why there isn't one. There could be one.
I mean, I think in our case, we certainly would be more than happy to add one. I think it was just a question of time. We put it together last week, but I really appreciate the comment, and we would be super happy to add a voiceover. So yeah, I'll talk to my team and to make sure that happens. Thank you for the feedback.
Well, shall I go next? Our group also had a very wide-ranging discussion, and one of the takeaways I have from it is that while the adaptation and mitigation is very important, we can't turn our back on the need for the emission reductions, and that was obviously a very heartfelt response to this one. Was yes, but we need to talk about this, but we also need to do all these other things. And we actually spent a fair amount of time talking about all those other things that need to be done. One area that we talked about was it's difficult for community members to respond to a consultation like this because they are not aware of the risks. That information is not being disseminated very well, and so there's some education needed there. One of the members told us that she thought it was the cooperative's insurance has an assessment site where you can put in your address, and they'll tell you whether you're on a floodplain or other risk assessment things. So something like that would be very helpful. And another big question was about, we need to, it's not just about setting these goals and objectives. We really need to change the way we look at the world. It's transformative, not just doing some tinkering. There was a question about what will happen to the plan if there's a change in government. So I didn't have much of an answer for that, but that's something that we need to think about too, that it needs to go beyond just the work of one government. So I think that covers the main points, but there were some recommendations for some books, which I'll pass along. Apparently Jane Fonda has a book that's excellent, something about from climate anxiety to doing something about it. And she looks at all the various impacts that climate change is having on the world. So that might be something that we keep in mind. And there was another book, though. This is An Uprising. I don't know if you're familiar with that. This is, it outlines effective social mobilization and advocacy techniques. And I think that's as far as my notes went. But thank you, group. We had a very good discussion.
So I guess I'll round us off. So we had a discussion largely about both the style and the topics of choice in terms of adding things to the discussion. So a lot of our conversation started off with, you know, the challenge of dealing with technical language and sort of deciding that the best approach, at least for the folks that we're all talking in our group, were to share stories, to keep them clear and relatively short, but also impactful on that level of not trying to speak the expert's language, but really speaking from a personal experience position. And then we sort of got onto the topic of some of the ideas that we would want to include that were important, that maybe would be more forum ideas that aren't really captured by necessarily all of the topics. So things like regenerative farming, things like the importance of education as an adaptation measure. We can only adapt if we understand what we're adapting to and what that looks like. And another issue was about what's, you know, how can we know, or how will we know that the government is sort of engaging with our feedback? And so adding comments about accountability, you know, what we hope to see, you know, we want to see demonstrable evidence that this consultation is being used in the adaptation plan. So things like that. And then I'm trying to think here, I think that was pretty much the crux of our conversation, sort of more practical. We didn't go through the toolkit, but it seemed like we were just, the conversation was mostly just about sharing, you know, what's important to us in terms of the adaptation measures that we all want to take and we all want to make sure are captured. Oh yeah, and the one other thing I mentioned when we were talking is that in the ideas section of each of the objectives, there's a little heart at the bottom right-hand corner of each idea that you can click on to sort of upvote that comment. So if you are very busy, for example, Lynn, to some of your folks' concerns, if you are very busy and what you want to do is just scroll through those ideas, you can actually heart, you can like them so that you are, you know, someone knows that there are, you know, 200 people who love this idea. And that I think also is an important indicator of where people's priorities are at. So that was all of us. And yeah, thank you everyone for your thoughts and contributions. It was a lovely chat.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Just in closing, we will be popping a survey in the chat just to give us some feedback on this event and let us know how we did. Also, please know that we will be following up with all of these resources. So we'll be leaving you with tons of resources to help you engage. Just a reminder, it's July 15th as the deadline. So you have about a month to engage in this process. So definitely slot it in your calendar, make time for it. We would really, really appreciate it. See all of those links in the chat. And thank you so much to everyone for attending. Thank you to the presenters, tech, planning, like everybody who put this together. Thank you so much. As a last little note, we'll be taking a screenshot picture of everyone. So if you do want to participate and be in the kind of gallery picture, turn on your camera. But if you don't want to participate, feel free to turn off your camera right now. And Mary will be doing that. Mary, if you want to let me know when you have done that, because I don't think I can see or know when you've done that. So let me know when you want everybody to kind of smile and say cheese.
Yeah, I'm seeing all the little boxes turn on, which is great. So there are 2 pages worth of people. We've had a big turnout today, so I'm gonna just take 2 screenshots. So you won't know which page you're on, but just hang tight. Okay, so the first one, we're gonna say National Adaptation Strategy. All right, now I'm going to switch to the next one and give it a sec. All right, and again, smile. Awesome. All right, we're good.
Okay, thank you so much. And as a final goodbye, feel free to unmute yourself so that you can say goodbye in audio format. And that's how we'll sign off today.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.